Hi, everyone. I'm Brianna Carter, a global engagement manager here at Next 47. And today we're talking to Kent Wills, Senior Director of Engineering at Yelp. Welcome to the show, Kent.
Hey, Bri. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you spent a decade working in the development productivity space and have recently shifted to consumer products. Tell us a bit about that transition and how are those two areas, inform each other in your current role?
There's
Yeah.
a bunch of different things that people think of when they think of developer productivity. And the reality is we kind of do a little bit of everything. But one thing that I will call out is that I didn't come up in an operations org. So I wasn't in the infra side. What we were doing instead is kind of from the other way. So we started with the consumer org as an engineer delivering products, and there were starting to become some of these long-term problems that we needed to start solving. This is particularly at Yelp. And so we broke off a group and we started to create application infrastructure. Sometimes some of that went into some more of that core infra stuff. And so we would partner with our infra group, we'd partner with our security group if we had one. When I started at Yelp, it was a smaller group. So when I think of developer productivity, I think about that group that is really helping take a step back and thinking about solving those long-term problems for an organization. And so to answer your question, which is like, well, how is it different now that I'm over in the consumer product org? Well, I've spent the last decade building out products with my group to support the consumer product org. And now we're driving some of the core features for Yelp. And we have to use those tools and we have to use that infrastructure. So it's a great way for us to dog food those tools, for me to actually see the other side of the house. And that comes with a lot of differences.
Are you noticing some challenges? You're like, oh, that actually didn't work the way I thought it was going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in our old org, we didn't have product managers. So kind of had to act as the product management arm and all my EMs as well. And so it's actually great to have data science support, product management support, all of these extra people doing these tasks that take a lot of time, to do investigation and whatnot. And definitely the conversations are different. We have a lot longer time scale when we're thinking about infrastructure. We're thinking about something that is going to stand the test of time, something that isn't going to really keep us on call all the time. And so how do we scale ourselves with being a little bit of a smaller group on the infra side? And then on the flip side, when we go into the product world, it's like, how do we ship this as fast as possible and get it out into production? And so there's a nice piece here where I can pull in those conversations about making those deliberate trade-offs between fast and reliable.
Well, Ken, I'm curious, kind of, when should leaders think about investing in developer productivity? Where in their process should they start taking that step?
When you're still trying to find product market fit, spending a lot of time on making sure that all your code is perfect and that it's scalable is potentially solving the wrong problem at the time. And so there's this balance of recognizing when, you've hit exactly where you want to hit for the product and it's just about scaling it versus we're still trying to figure things out and, oh, let's specify a whole group over here to make sure our engineering hygiene is good. That's probably not the best investment of resources at that time.
I want to say if it's not broke, don't fix it. But
well, it's interesting you say that because that was really our mantra at Yelp. So we would wait until these problems started to become bigger problems until we solved it. And on one side, that's a efficient way of prioritizing. On the other side, there is a tendency to maybe wait a little bit too long until you recognize that it is actually the problem that it is.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. So, what role do you think leadership plays in kind of creating a culture where you don't wait too long? That you kind of are, you have your finger on the pulse of
Yeah.
really kind of understanding developer productivity.
I could probably think about this in a bunch of different ways. When I came into the group, I came in as an engineer. Over time, I transitioned to management and then to leading the group. And I think the thing that I realized very quickly is that as an engineer, we had a very clear picture of where there were challenges in the engineering org. And I know there's a big focus on metrics nowadays, and I think metrics have a space in your toolkit. But I would also say that your engineers are going to be the most vocal about the things that are getting in their way for developing very early on. And you can take time for solving those problems even when you're a smaller organization. It doesn't mean that you have to dedicate an entire group into thinking about this. But I think as leaders, we do need to advocate a little bit for some of this work to get done, because sometimes it's a little bit harder to show the value of the work. On the product side, we talk about the revenue that you're going to bring in and the number of users that you're going to be able to impact with your feature. On the infrastructure side, you're a couple layers removed. And so unless there's somebody there balancing out that conversation, it can get a little bit lopsided and you can find yourself in trouble pretty quickly.
Kent, through, as kind of individual contributor going into leadership, what were some tactical implementations of company culture or team hygiene that you saw that really helped for developers to kind of raise their hand, like you mentioned, or really fostered this kind of environment of let's fix it, let's work on it?
Yeah, so maybe I'll tell a story of one of my mentors when I first joined at Yelp. He spent a lot of time going through code reviews, and he was the person that was going to be this person that you had to get past to be able to get code in production. And I remember my first day, he just marked up my code, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I have so much work I need to do here. And so I think one thing we realized is like, there's a lot of knowledge here, but that knowledge isn't scaling. But that's actually where we started to think about building some of this tooling. So one of the tools that came out of Yelp was a tool called Pre-Commit. And one piece of like code hygiene that we had was you needed to follow the PEP 8 style guide, which is the Python style guide for code. And, it's not a big thing, but it does make it simpler if somebody's going from one team to the next team and looking at somebody else's code, and that there's similarities there. So it's a little less friction inducing to write code from team to team. And so we had this tool called Pre-Commit where it would actually go through and automatically make style changes to your code. And then you would have to you would approve the changes, resubmit it. And those are checks that would happen before you would even push code to production. And so that was actually one of the big things that we learned very early on in our organization, is that if we have policies and we have process, it's very hard to get engineers to adhere to that process in a consistent way as the organization scales. And so the only way you can really enforce that is by actually putting in strict enforcement in code. And so you would try to push your code up, it would come back almost like running a test suite, right? And it would say, nope, you need to fix this, this, and this. And so when he did that, he could just take and kind of dump all of his knowledge on what, we cared about, or what he cared about. And maybe we would debate on what's important and what's not. And he now scaled himself in the organization. So he could think about other things. And he was a very good engineer. So that probably wasn't the best use of his time to go through and just add a bunch of nits for the code review. So I think, kind of back to your question, as leaders, if we can start to allow for time to be carved out for some of these automations, and I think the great thing, back when I started, we didn't have these things as like open source projects. They didn't exist. So we ended up building a lot of these things internally at Yelp. But nowadays, you can actually get good code hygiene, good best practices for your code, just through adding some of these automated checks into your infrastructure, without dedicating a huge amount of time to it. And so I think giving some space to your engineers to be able to do that, especially your engineers that are more senior and understand the right challenges to focus on.
Dude, it's where are you spending your energy, and is it the right time? Is it the right problem? And Kenta, I'm curious, where do you see the future of developer productivity in the next 5-10 years? If you had a magic ball, where is it going?
The thing that I'm most excited about is probably the thing that we spend the most time on in larger organizations. And I would say, so it's around code migration. So typically in developer productivity org, you might have some engineers that say, hey, look, we need to maybe make these upgrades to infrastructure. Code is always changing. So we need to apply this patch. We need to apply this minor version, this major version. And so that creates a ton of work across all these different teams. In fact, like we were going through and adding up the amount of time that it might take for one of these migrations. And I think we ended up with like 4 years of developer time for one of our many migrations. And of course, this isn't like sequential time. So this is just adding up all the clock time for every engineer that's working on this at the organization. So I'm really excited to see, with a lot of these code generation tools, this is still assistive technology. We still need the experts, the engineering experts to come in and say, look, these are the right things to work on and prioritize in the organization. But then once we've defined that work, it doesn't really make sense for those experts to have to go through and write all that code. We started when we were a smaller organization. Maybe the infra teams would take the responsibility of writing that code for other teams. We got to a point as we scaled where that was no longer possible. And so we spread it out to all of the teams. And well, that means that your timeline shifts out too, because everybody has different priorities. And so if we could just kind of simplify that problem in organizations and just automatically keep our code up to date and keep good hygiene over time, man, that would be an amazing thing for a lot of larger organizations.
Again, focusing on that right time, good hygiene.
Right. Yeah. So if you have one repository and, it's less than 10,000 lines of code, then that is probably less of a problem for you.
Can you share your experience and what that has looked like working with Next 47 and my team on the go-to-market side?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess a little bit more about my background. I talked a lot about scaling of our internal groups at Yelp, but one of the things that we did very early on is we built a lot of these developer productivity tools that are really coming out on the market today, but we had to build those back 6, 8 years ago because we didn't have those tools on the market, whether that was metrics, whether that was ownership, whether that was building out infrastructure for design systems. Back when I started at Yelp, design systems wasn't even a term. So a lot of this stuff that we've built over time is very applicable to a lot of the companies, SaaS companies today that are coming out and building these products. And so that is a place where I have expertise, not just in the side of building these products, but also understanding the pitfalls of building these products and consuming these products, because we're actually working directly with our users at Yelp who are consuming all of these internal products. So when typically what happens is either Bree will reach out or others from Next 47 and say, hey, there's this person in this space and they wanted to talk about this particular aspect of this tool. What are the challenges that you might face within an organization for that sort of scaling? How do I think about metrics in my own organization? And, when should I care about those metrics? And so I think it typically starts with a conversation with somebody like you, Bree, and then I will get a ping from Bree and say, hey, or Albert, and say, hey, I think Kent might be a good person to talk to in this space.
Because Kent, you are a good person to talk to, for sure, hands down. So what advice would you give to startups on how to best leverage partnerships with investors like Next 47?
Well, I mean, you all have built a really great network with a bunch of diverse people in the network. And so I think I kind of think of it the same way as when we were building at Yelp. We were focused on a problem that we needed to solve. And so if you have problems that you're trying to solve, I think you can share those problems, and then, Bree, you or Albert can kind of match up with the experts in the community who might be able to help make some headway on that problem in a best practice way, in a way that like somebody has kind of gone through this experience before and can walk through where those challenges might be, saving you a lot of time and energy.
So Kent, you've been great. Where can audiences learn more about your work and connect with you?
This is probably something that I have not done as well on. I don't have like a public website or anything like that. I have my LinkedIn, so maybe we can share that link. But I think especially for the Next 47 crowd, if they just reach out to you or Albert or anybody else in the group, that could be a very easy way to set up that conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, sharing with us your knowledge and experience with development productivity. And thank you again.
Thanks so much.